Humans, we are born inquisitive. We've learned from trial and error. Mostly errors. It's amazing we made it this far. Even with our little and not so little blunders. That's the beauty of it. When we mess up, we help each other get back up. Keep trying. It's progress. Fairfirst is sure to give you a hand when you need one.
So go on, give it a try.
Back again. Aibowan, Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum, and good evening. Welcome to the 4th AmCham Sri Lanka Bounce Back SL online discussion brought to you in partnership with Fairfirst Insurance and the Daily FT. A series of online discussions themed, created and curated to bring you information, empirical insights, analysis and in-depth knowledge on topics that are immediately impactful to you in crafting your business recovery on a sustainable upward trajectory, and as we move forward facing the challenges that not just COVID-19 but the universe brings us. As you know, over the last month, we've been identifying and discussing the foundational steps that need to be taken to pivot sustainably as we navigate these troubled waters. We had a national SWOT analysis. We spoke about agility and repurposing in your business model, and we spoke about leadership in times of crisis. In a nutshell, what are the opportunities? What must we do in terms of business model to harness them? And how do we prepare and encourage our teams to do this? Now, of course, all these 3 sessions, as well as the recordings of our previous series, if you remember the AmCham Knowledge Hub series, are available on our YouTube channel, AmCham Sri Lanka. And I encourage you to have a watch or listen in the background for some invaluable insights and tips that will help you as we continue to progress on this navigational journey. Today, in the 4th of this series, we'll be taking a look at policy, specifically one that has enormous and ongoing implications, the import restrictions we are currently faced with. How does this affect the domestic supply chain? How does this affect our role in the global supply chain? And of course, what is the knock-on effect to the economy, especially given that we have now once more reverted to lower middle income status? So let me start off by introducing your moderator for this evening, Nista Kasim. Nista is, of course, the founding editor of the Daily FT, Sri Lanka's first and only national daily business paper since 2009. He's a highly respected senior journalist and editor with over 25 years of experience, with his byline appearing in many frontline newspaper publications in Sri Lanka over the years. He's widely traveled for training and journalism and marketing, as well as reporting of global and regional business and economic events for the Sri Lankan readership, and is also, of course, a member of the Editors Guild of Sri Lanka. Next, Suresh Pereira is the Principal Tax Regulatory at KPMG in Sri Lanka and is a multidisciplinary professional with over 20 years experience in taxation, accounting and legal aspects. He holds a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Colombo and is an attorney at law, a fellow member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, FCMA UK, and a Chartered Global Management Accountant. Suresh currently serves as a member of the Accounting Standards Committee of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka and was and is a member of several such statutory and governing bodies both locally and internationally. Gahanath Pandithage is the Director and Group CEO of Diesel and Motor Engineering Company, DEMO, a fellow member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants UK and an alumnus of the Harvard Business School Advanced Management Program. He was instrumental in introducing systems and computerized operations management to DEMO a few decades ago. Gahanath started his career at Ford Rhodes as an auditor and has the recognition of being appointed as the chairman of the IT strategy team of Daimler, Southeast Asia, a few years ago. Sanjay De Silva Jayaratna is the founder of Navesta Pharmaceuticals, Sri Lanka's first sterile injectable pharmaceutical plant and the first European Union Good Manufacturing Practices compliant pharmaceutical plant in the country. Sanjay has over 20 years experience across the pharmaceutical and healthcare domain and has worked at City Health Imports in the capacity of managing director prior to founding Navesta in 2015. Sanjay continues to spearhead change in support of the Sri Lankan economy by preventing the exchange outflow on imports for certain pharmaceutical products. Last but certainly not least, the man responsible for all my little luxuries, and of course, I'm sure the rest of you will agree, cheese and chocolate. Kumar De Silva is the Commercial Director of Spar Supermarkets Sri Lanka, a food man by trade. Kumar's over 25 years of experience spans across Sri Lankan FMCG chains with long stints at both John Keells Holdings as well as Fonterra Brands in Sri Lanka. I'm, of course, Rai Raymond, General Manager ED of the American Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka, creator and facilitator of this series. Nista, let me hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Rai. Welcome to everyone, all our webinar participants from behalf of the Daily FT. Let me put this webinar in context. After multiple decades, Sri Lanka in June recorded a trade surplus. Maybe going forward, we will continue to have trade surpluses. So that's significant when you're talking about imports. In May, imports were down by 44%, and going forward, we'll continue to see a declining trend. Now, I know people have expressed concerns why go for such a drastic measure in terms of containing, but I think there is, post-COVID, there is a foreign exchange crisis, not a crisis, but a foreign exchange, preserving the foreign exchange of Sri Lanka, coming with debt repayment coming up, and given the economic downturn as well. So I think I'm privileged to moderate this panel. There are champions of import substitution, and there are also pioneers in import in Sri Lanka. So, but I think what is more important is putting this new regulations in context. There have been multiple announcements from March onwards, and I'd like to invite Suresh to set the stage in terms of how many new regulations have come in place, and in your own perspective, what's the rationale? Suresh, over to you.
Thank you, Nista. Good evening, everybody. Let me begin by thanking AmCham for inviting me to participate in this webinar. And so what I propose to do is, first I will give you a synopsis with regard to the import restrictions that have been introduced during the past few months. As Nista rightly pointed out, this commenced somewhere in March. To be precise, on the 24th of March, there was a order issued. There was a operating instruction that was issued by the Controller General of Imports and Exports with regard to restricting importation of non-essential import goods. Now, that's the first document. The rest of the rules are contained in 3 more documents that were issued in April, 16th of April, and there's another one that was issued on the 22nd of May, and the latest one that was issued on the 30th June 2020. So the very first one was issued on the 24th of March, and that was to basically restrict the importation of non-essential imports of goods. Now, what is the rationale for introduction of that? And the document, actually the operating instruction itself contained the rationale, the reason, and the rationale given is to say, alleviate the pressure on exchange rates and the stress on financial markets. So we are talking about maintaining the value of the rupee here. And so essential goods, and also basically the major rule there, the major direction was to basically to give a direction to the customs and the commercial banks to suspend the facilitation of importation of non-essential goods as a temporary suspension. And so there was this tariff code, and certain items were recognized as, marked as temporary TS goods, and no payments to be made using any of the payment methods, including letter of credit, documents against acceptance, DP, that is documents against payment, open account or advance payment, or any combination until 23rd June 2020. So in this list, actually, most of the restricted items were in relation to plastic items. There was plastic floor covering, plastic sanitary ware, plastic packing material, plastic tableware, plastic household articles, plastic builders wear, seats, motor vehicles and aircraft, and etc. And then also metal and wooden furniture, toys, tricycles, dolls. These are the types of goods that were categorized as non-essential goods, and the restriction was imposed, and the restriction was to run up until 23rd June. But then what happened was, this operating instruction was repealed by the subsequent operating instruction that was issued on 16th of April, and this basically increased the import suspension item. And there are two schedules that are referred to in this second document, Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So the Schedule 1 contains the additional items subject to import suspension, and the Schedule 2 contains another list of items where one could import but with 3 months credit facility. So using the pro forma invoice, because it's necessary to prove that basically the credit facility, it's being imported under credit facility. And then of course there was suspension of payment terms also using open accounts and the consignment basis. So this Schedule 1 and the Schedule 2 is basically the base. Now what's there in the Schedule 1? Schedule 1 is basically the TS items, that means the temporary suspended items, and that covers things like live fish, fish fillet, and cereal, and the flour, malt, groundnuts, soya bean, sugar confectionery, chocolate, pasta, cereal, beer, wine, ethyl alcohol, and paints, cement, tubes, ceramics, and so on, so right. So it's a long list. And then basically the Schedule 2 contains items like milk and cream. Now the Schedule 2 items are the ones that you can import with 3 months free. Butter, milk, coal, iron products, stainless steel products, copper wire, magnets, and things like that. Because there's a whole list here also. Now this again underwent a change in May. On 22nd May, another document was, or the 21st May, there was another document was issued to be effective from the 22nd of May. And this gazette seeks to increase the list of the imported suspended items again. And it's from that date, that is from the 22nd of May, the restriction was introduced to motor vehicles, air conditions, to the suspension list. Also, this the document, the gazette issued in May 22nd, also introduced certain exceptions also. So if a person is importing for export purposes, then there's an exception that is introduced. Now, to enjoy the exception, there should be 20% local value addition. This should be imported and then should be exported, right? So 20% local value addition, and the export remittance should be brought to Sri Lanka within 60 days, and those are the conditions. And in relation to the raw materials imported for manufacture and the export, also subject to fulfillment of conditions, the exceptions an exception was introduced in this May Gazette. And if the payment is to be made using NFE basis, or if money is available in FCBU account or business foreign currency account, or using the funds coming from the foreign buyer to make the payment, well, then this exception was applicable for that category of importers of raw material for manufacture and to be exported also. And the third category was basically if the raw material is locally not available, and again if the person is in a position to prove that there's 35% value addition, and within 36 days the remittance to be effected to Sri Lanka, the proceeds, this facility was provided, the exception was provided, right? So that's basically what happened in the third document, that is the May. And then came the next document in the June 30th, the last document, And here what happened is, in this gazette, the suspensions are relaxed for certain items such as motor vehicles for transport of goods. So transport of goods, if you are bringing down motor vehicles for transportation of goods, or refrigerators, freezers, or washing machines, then there is a relaxation of suspension that we can see in the June gazette. And then also certain suspended items that were in the Schedule 1 were shifted to the Schedule 2. Things like certain accessories or components of the motor vehicles or washing machines, lamps and light fittings and things like that were shifted from the Schedule 1, that in the suspension list, to be imported on credit basis. So that's basically the synopsis of the documents, or where the rules are coming from those 4 documents, Nista.
Okay, thank you, Suresh. Interesting synopsis. What we will do is ask each of the industry leaders in this panel to list their own concerns or recommendation in terms of policy, and then we will go into specific questions. Webinar participants are encouraged to type in their questions in the Q&A window, and we'll try and see how try and accommodate as many as possible. Gahanath, I'd like to start off with you. What is DMO's perspective in terms of automobile industry?
Hello Nista, hello Suresh, Sanjay, everybody there. Thank you for inviting me on this thing. Before the automobile strategy, I think you must see the whole world at this moment is having such a big going into a recession. Like GDP growths are falling as far as some countries 60% from the first quarter. Stock markets falling down and unemployment rising. Like for example, in the United States, unemployment is like 44 million, double our population. So I think with our in Sri Lankan's contents, with the say foreign currency coming in has completely dropped because of the tourism industry, remittances, people are coming back, returning, all that. So I think the government decision on restricting foreign currency on imports is fair, I would say. But when it comes to banning of imports, it's really I do not 100% agree. We should be like there should be rationalizing on import, not really banning. Because there are items which can be substituted, import substitute, which are grown here or which can be done here. But as now Suresh was telling, the vehicles, I don't think anything can be done here other than maybe a little bit of rubber items, which rubber is produced here. So that type of thing, it's a very, very small part of a vehicle. So when you really look at that, there should be we should be not allowing any imports or import restrictions or rationalizing should be there for import substitutional product, but not for everything. That's our opinion on this.
Okay, thank you. Move on to Kumar. Suresh, I'll give you a chance. Kumar, just can you? Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much, AmCham, for organizing this webinar, and thank you for inviting Spark Sri Lanka. My initial thoughts are, we being in the retail industry, we do understand the importance and the impact of these restrictions. And it is now about how we kind of maneuver the customer expectations. That is one of our biggest challenges at the moment. So it's about how we balance their needs, their demands, plus I think the evolving needs based on these kind of restrictions. So our focus now is with respect to those evolving needs.
Thank you, Kumar. And I'll move on to Sanjay, Sanjay from a pharma industry perspective. Sanjay, can you give your perspective?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for inviting me for this forum. When Suresh was going through the list, everybody must have realized that pharmaceutical was not on that list. So it applies to pharmaceuticals, finished products, and also raw materials. So as a manufacturer in the country, so we haven't had any problems with regards to that. But then again, I would like to say that we were all discussing about the forex problem that this country is facing right now, because $700 million of pharmaceuticals are imported to the country every year. So I believe it's the time now for pharmaceutical manufacturing to become that thrust industry where some sort of import substitution can be can take place. So and forex impact can be managed little bit through that.
Okay, thank you for opening remarks. Suresh, you want to respond to Gahanath?
Yeah, that's with regard to the motor vehicles. Actually, now what happened was basically when the motor vehicles was suspended 22nd of May, all motor vehicles, bicycles and motor parts and accessories importation was restricted. But from the end of June, motor vehicles for transportation of goods have been allowed. It's removed, right? So it's basically the motor vehicles that you and I use, the cars, the bicycles are the ones that are remaining, that are basically prohibited from being imported until further notice. So you get two categories: motor vehicles for transportation of goods and the other motor vehicles, right?
Okay, thank you. I want to ask Gahanath as to you mentioned about rationalization or restrictions, but also Suresh can sort of bring some insights. I mean, you think what would have been much more effective in terms of revenue and forex saving? Complete ban, given that this may be temporary, or government took the easy route in terms of banning across the board, as opposed to selectively allowing certain restrictions or continuing to impose. Also, this famous argument that we have too many vehicles on the road, how would DMO respond to that?
Yeah, thing is, I think Suresh, as far as the information which I have, on the 30th June, the ban is not open for even vehicles which are for movement of products, cargo vehicles. It is still on. Spare parts were released, because spare parts which were there, it's released, of course, with 180 days, almost 6 months supply credit. So that we cannot import. Forget the passenger cars which we handle, Mercedes-Benz, Jeep, all that. Even for a small demo Batta is not allowed to be imported to Sri Lanka at the moment. Spare parts, you're correct, the spare parts for those which are banned, that was released. So that is the first thing. Now, if you compare vehicles which can be like an import substitution, I cannot think of a vehicle that can be substituted or done in Sri Lanka with the resources what we have, the raw materials and things like that. See, some time back, I don't know whether you all remember, we had demo buses, to build a bus. If you see modern manufacturing or assembly of vehicles, these are all high-tech. It's done by robots and things like that, very little human intervention. But now, even the assembly part is very, very small. But for example, to do a bus here, because the chassis are imported, and there are a lot of manual process which you have to do, which we can do it with our labor, which is, our staff is, labor or our people in Sri Lanka are so good at that. Sometime back, we used to export buses to Bangladesh, Singapore, Dubai, and even some cars to London. We used to do it through our assembly plant. Of course, the government's change and all that thing, it stopped for really assembly, because now in Sri Lanka, if you have to assemble a product, you must see a vehicle, how to assemble a vehicle. You have to have a lot of safety features you have to look after. Then modern technology, you have to keep on updating. And product development, you have to, if you don't develop, because now, and the economies of scale, if you really see, now for 20 million people, the production plant will not be able to cover its overheads by putting up assembly plant. So these are some areas. Now see countries like Singapore, as far as I know like figures like they sell 6,000 to 7,000 Mercedes-Benz vehicles a year. Our whole population of Mercedes-Benz vehicles are not there. They don't have a plant there because they know, of course they have very high import duties and things like that. So there's no complete ban on such. And you also talked about the road area and things like that. In Singapore, they very well carefully assemble what they call, there's a thing called a certificate of entitlement. You have to scrap the old vehicle and then only are allowed to import a new one. So they manage it accordingly. And for your information, even countries like Australia, they had so many production plants there that they do not manufacture any more vehicles in Australia because it's not economically viable for to do that,
Yeah, Gahanath, your assembly operations, export operations were, I think, during the closed economy era. I presume.
Not really. This was, mid-80s, right?
Okay, right. So you moved out of because change in government policy, but this lobby for assembly, we have seen at least two plants have come in the last few months or last 1 year. That lobby is growing very rapidly. What's the? I mean, you say there is zero value addition, but why there is so much support for such assembling? For me, these value additions are just a book entry, I would say. As very clearly you can see, take one of those vehicles and remove into pieces and see what is produced in Sri Lanka. It's only the small labor part. Others are, everything is imported, it's only maybe a little bit of, because there is a minimum of 30% local addition, they say. But that includes the profit margin and the labor cost. So if you really see material-wise, we do not manufacture anything for a vehicle in Sri Lanka. Even tires, if you see, compare tires, when you really look at it, we have a tire industry in Sri Lanka, they were producing some time back, big truck tires. But their capacities are not enough even to do truck tires in Sri Lanka. And even agriculture tires. And if you see modern vehicle tires, you cannot now. There we have some ambulances, Tata ambulances with this 1990, and that the tire sizes are not available because producing a tire is not easy. You have to look at the speed rating, load rating, and in case of deflation, how the vehicle will handle. Otherwise, going on the highway, the whole vehicle will topple. And it's a very safety item, So these are vehicle production is not easy to do it. Okay. There are a lot of lobbying, I know, but this is, companies like Demo, which is responsible for a country, we will not do it because compromising on those factors. Okay. Just a last question to you, Gahanath. One of the reasons is that the potential to export to Africa, because lots of Indian vehicles go through Sri Lanka because of shipping convenience. You think made in Sri Lanka won't hold much promise, or certain markets don't really care as long as it's branded? Yeah, the problem is that if you really look at it now, even for Africa, they will take all Indian products because they'll be very much cheaper because of the economies of scale. If they produce so much of vehicles, Sri Lanka to cover that will be very expensive, will not be competitive in Africa. I think if you see the vehicle industry, we should be doing things like education. We can have there are a lot of qualified people who can teach. Vehicle industry people, we can have universities. Of course, we are doing it for the past so many years. And a lot of other, like this kind of vehicle related things, we can do it here in Sri Lanka, but not to manufacture a vehicle, because that is, I don't think even Africa one thing will be never competitive. And production, we don't have raw materials to do it. Okay, fine. Thank you. Sanjay, I'll move on to you because I see the economic case to pharmaceutical manufacturer. Also, there is a strong import lobby. Then there is this quality issue as well. Particularly, you're talking about Bangladesh, India, which are fairly large in size, in scale. What do you think in terms of price advantage, quality? How can you sort of compete against Indian suppliers and Bangladesh suppliers?
Right. See, Nista, competing in terms of price with Indian suppliers is more or less it's difficult, because India alone has 1.3 billion population, and then again with the economies of scale, because India exports close to about $50 billion of pharmaceuticals annually. So with that, it's very difficult to compete in price. But in terms of quality, yes. But when it comes to Bangladesh, yes, again it's a big market with 160 million population. But yes, with Bangladesh we can compete in quality and price. We can compete. But having said that, Bangladesh is also equally successful in the international market, just like Bangladesh and Pakistan also.
Yes, that's Pakistan.
Yeah, Pakistan also. So Sri Lanka has been the only country that has been importing 85% of the requirement of pharmaceuticals, whereas Bangladesh is self-sufficient, Pakistan is self-sufficient, India was self-sufficient long time ago. We're talking about 25 years ago. So we are the only country like this at the moment. Only 15% of total pharmaceuticals are manufactured in the country.
Yeah.
So that's why it needs to.
Right. Do you think that the fact that we only produce 15% is largely because our import policy has not been very favorable for the industry? Or has the industry realized that given the regional dominance of Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, is there any sense in being another player when you have three huge exporters and producers?
Yes. See, 15% is as of 2020. But 5 years ago, about 7 years ago, government introduced something called a buyback agreement, guaranteed buyback agreement for all government purchases. So at that time, it would have been 7%, and we have grown twofolds by now, all local manufacturers. So government policy has been good from 7 years ago. It started in 2013 up to now. But then again, there has been far better government policies in India, Bangladesh and Pakistan, hence the reason why they are self-sufficient and why they are exporting also. Yes, we have we also, Sri Lanka being a fourth player in the region, yes, we have capacity to do that in the export market also.
Right. In terms of that policy about buyback agreement is fine, but how big is that market? And do you see more players coming into tap? It's like a secure market, again ensuring, but it doesn't make you very competitive in terms of international trade because there is guaranteed buying. But how big is that segment of the market? You said $700 million overall.
Yeah, so guaranteed buying is only for government purchases, not for the private market. So government purchases, I would say it's about 40 to 45% of that 700 million. What was the other question, Nista?
Yeah, in terms of, 40% of the market. Do you see more people coming into the industry now?
Yes. With especially after COVID-19, the pandemic situation and government policy to stopping imports of certain items, and pharmaceuticals are not there. Pharmaceuticals are being imported, but I don't know. It could happen. It may happen. It may not happen. But yes, there's sudden interest in the industry, pharma manufacturing.
You also dependent on imports, which you say there are no restrictions right now. But other than allowing you to import any other policy measures that the government can take in terms of further promoting pharmaceutical industry, because I think government is identified as one of the future winners going forward. So I want you to tell me whether any more can be done, plus also the potential for exports.
Right. So, pharma is a highly regulated industry. So when a plant starts operating in Sri Lanka, it takes minimum 2 years for it to be export ready. So for that 2 years, it has to be the local market that any pharma company in any country has to depend on. So what's the other part of the question?
No, in terms of export potential.
Export potential, yes. So right now, there are 2 companies in the country that is exporting in small scale to regional markets. So yes, in future, in next 5 years, there will be more plants coming in, and there will be a big export potential.
Okay, thank you. Kumar, I just move on to you before we go for the other questions. Kumar, you are the only global chain that is in this particular segment. There is also aspiration to sort of, when they come to your supermarket, that they would like to see lots of imported products. How big is the of the segment? What's the percentage of imported products you have? I know you don't import it directly, but you're reliant on various importers. How are you sort of satisfying customer needs?
Yeah, so to look at a percentage of imports and what we sell out of our stores, it's approximately, if you take the Schedule 1, is about 10%. But if we add up both, it could be as high as 15 to 20%. Considering that some of these products, as indicated initially, like the plastic goods or containers, could be byproducts that we're using for certain finished goods. So there is that list as well. So there are products that we buy from suppliers and retail. At the same time, we do some sort of preparation in terms of convenience foods in our store. So yeah, about 20% would be overall with those items as well. We take both Schedule 1 and 2.
Okay, fine. Recently, the confectionery industry, who are sort of impacted by the palm oil imports, but that's partly for not because of domestic issues, supply issues as well. They were looking at local alternatives for some of their inputs. Is SPAR looking at as well that alternative?
Yes. So if you look at CBL, who's the local partner here, they are looking into those categories very seriously, and we definitely see opportunity. Like you said, I think it's now about how we look at alternates and how we can bring up the standards to whatever that we had before using imported material. So I think due to this, the way I see it, there is also some pressure in the right way for local manufacturers to step up and take that opportunity and supply such products into the market. And we are supporting that 100% because we feel that is what will help the broader community locally, especially during this kind of challenging times.
Okay, but from a international brand perspective, what is your USP? Why should someone come to you?
Yeah, so Nishla, if you really look at our core principle of SPAR, we are a voluntary trading organization. So for us, it's about how we empower local businessmen, we can call them general traders or small and medium traders, how we can support them to trade in retail. That is the core business of SPAR. And as a foreign entity, like you mentioned, I think it's how we share that expertise that we have gained from overseas markets and how we can develop the local players. So I think that's our core. Looking at the broader picture, it's not the case right now. We do have corporate stores at the moment. But looking at it from a medium to long term, that will be our approach.
Okay, fine. Thank you. I'll just take a question which has been sort of pending for a while. I think this is to Suresh about restrictions of importation of plastic items applicable to raw materials. You can respond to that question from a participant.
Yeah, I think the question here is, is this restriction on importation of plastic items applicable to plastic raw materials used for plastic packaging as well? So actually, under HS heading 39.8 to 39.22, 23, 24, and 25, 26, there's a whole list of, there are 6 pages Nista here.
Okay.
And under 94, so I think I need to go through this one in detail and respond to that answer.
Okay, then maybe you can respond. I like the panel to focus on what's the impact individually for your businesses. I mean, not Sanjay, but both Ganath and Kumar. Ganath, how, because the motor industry anyway tend to get affected by various tariff measures, but how much impacted are you all right now from a vehicle business perspective?
Yeah, so luckily we had stocks with us, so we were able to survive till about August, because early imports were quite well there. But we have strengthened our after sales side quite a lot, so we could repair things like that, so that because we have like almost 1,800 direct employees and more than another 500 subcontractors and things like that. So far we are able to manage it. Of course, like, we're not making money as such, but we should be able to manage. But also, you know that we are gone into a lot of diversification on agriculture, fertilizer, that kind of thing. Also education and things like that. And we also do Siemens businesses like medical equipment and that kind of thing. So because of that, the group, as a group, we are so far managing well, I would say.
Okay, fine. Kumar, how impacted are you and your customers?
Yeah, so if you take financially, we are not impacted heavily, mainly because Nista, it's also difficult to gauge that, because we are operating during a time which is not normal, right? So there are shortages both in local products as well as imported. And we see consumers switching brands. Obviously, if you look at the fundamentals of retail or supermarkets, they come for choice, right? They come for variety. So when one's brand is not there, they will switch unless it's a essential item and they just can't find an alternate. So the challenge to us is at the moment it's more from a demand perspective. It's difficult to forecast accurate demands because it's not the same, and there are different products being purchased because certain categories are impacted at the moment. But the biggest, I think, challenge is how we kind of manage, like I said, the customer expectations. So when they walk in, some customers may not even know that some products are now restricted, and they would look at our store as, oh, we don't have products on the shelf. So that is something we need to manage. That is a current challenge. But I must say many local companies have stepped up, and due to the situation, people are also switching lots of brands.
Okay, fine. Ganath, I know you mentioned about you're not so much impacted, but that is because the economy has come to a kind of a standstill or hasn't really got back to its normal post-COVID. But assuming that things get back to normal, or when people want to get back to business as fast as possible, with these kind of restrictions, do you think it will sort of delay the recovery of the country or certain sectors and making getting back to business more costlier? I'm talking about users of your various vehicles, particularly the commercial goods.
Yeah, if you take the vehicle industry, Nista, it's really, passenger cars we could survive. I mean, that's not really so much depending on the economic activity, but commercial vehicles, if you don't have, then the whole economy will come down. It's from the smallest economic, a person, a small farmer who's using a demo batta, even going up to a construction industry, a tipper or something like that. So this whole thing, if there's economic development, this has to come to Sri Lanka. On top of that, even things like tires, it has to be opened up, and because you cannot run vehicles without a tire. So there will be, as I told you earlier, even ambulances are off-road at the moment. So this import, as I earlier was telling, it should be not like really import for import substituted things. I totally agree with the government. We should see, for example, now we have gone into agriculture, like things like that. Like people are importing chilies, people are importing salt. These things government can have real bans, because this can be produced here. But an item like a vehicle, this I think has to be relaxed to our economy to run, because transport is a major component, transporting goods as well as transporting people in case of buses. So otherwise the economy will be slowed down. Yes, that's my opinion.
Okay. Suresh, you spoke, I just wanted to ask this earlier also, in terms of you talked about four documents or 4 lists. What was the rationale to have multiple lists in terms of new rules and regulations? And I also want you to comment on these restrictions. There is no time bar in terms of there is no, it's kind of more open-ended until further notice. One is, how could companies plan, and also in terms of policy consistency, what's your own take?
Yeah, I think here what has happened is in March, when the non-essential goods were restricted, only a limited number of items were listed there. So subsequently, there was in April, there was additions that were included. And in addition to giving 2 bases, the temporary suspended items, as well as the items that could be imported on a credit basis. And thereafter, what happened in May and June is basically restriction, the exceptions or relaxations have been introduced. So what we see here is basically, knee-jerk kind of reactions. The police, on trial and error basis, sometimes the law is introduced, and thereafter when the feedback is coming from the business community, we do see basically again the policy changes taking place. So we do have a, it's not basically, the policy is not designed at first and then it is rolled out after obtaining the feedback from the business community. It's a case of going ahead and implementing something, and thereafter when the responses and the feedback is coming from the business community, we do tend to introduce the amendment to the policy. I think that's what we see in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, given the extraordinary situation, Suresh, I mean, it was not a situation where you could have consulted the industry or the importers and then, go up and down in terms of which one to reduce. I mean, it's not basically impossible to do that. You think government went from a revenue aspect, when I say revenue in terms of cost of imports, or you think they had a real economic case to ban some of the products?
No, I think it seems basically the government is trying to balance the protect the rupee. I think that's the main reason here, though there are other reasons also given. And but there's another thing that I want to bring out here with regard to the importation of articles. What we can see is in Sri Lanka, the collection of revenue to the government is coming from 2 authorities: Commission General Inland Revenue, the tax revenue in relation to domestic supply of goods and services, and the second one, the authority is the Director General Customs, collecting the revenue at the point of importation. Now, if you look at I have some numbers with regard to, let's say, the last year, the numbers that we have, it's 2018, we find that 54% of the national revenue is coming from Director General of Customs collections. Only 46 is coming from Commission General Inland Revenue. Now, if you look at the motor vehicle industry, now out of the total revenue collection by the Director General Customs, that is 990 million and 919 and 45 million, 770 million is coming from taxes on motor vehicles only. Now, what is happening is basically when you basically cut down or eliminate the importation of motor vehicles, we have to keep in mind this revenue is also not going to come. So I think I read somewhere basically in month of June we do have seen the deficit. There's a positive deficit that we have seen, but at the same time we have to keep in mind there's a hidden cost also here because the revenue collected by the Director General of Customs is also not taking place here.
Okay, fine. Rai, thank you very much for the panel. Rai, you like to take some webinar participants' questions? Rai, are you there?
Yes, hi Nista. Yeah, so that actually there was one question that I wanted to bring up. So let me pose this to Suresh because I don't know if you'll be able to help us out here. One of our AmCham members is asking, I think this is a specific question, that a central air conditioning system imported with an LC in December and finally shipped in May because of the COVID disruptions are being blocked by, from clearing, despite the fact that the LC was open 7 months ago. He also says that there's a risk of over 200 construction workers losing their jobs because work having to be halted because of this. I'm sure that not only this gentleman but a lot of other people may be facing similar situations. Suresh or even Nista, if you can maybe advise who or what steps could be taken to sort this issue out, who the member could reach out to. Any advice from our panel on that?
Yeah, I think
So that's a very common problem faced by everyone. Goods in transit in between the changes in policy. I don't know whether Ipoh has faced similar problems as well. How is solving it?
Yeah, can I respond to that question? Yeah, now what we have to keep in mind is, though these gazettes have been issued restricting the importation of articles, you can see the last one that came, right? There is a discussion given to the Director General of Import and Exports in the interest of the national economy to waive off the application of this content of this gazette, these rules. So it's not, how do I say, hard and fast rule as such. It is dependent upon the discretion of the Director General of Import and Exports also. So actually, if you have a serious issue, and if we can sustain that it is going to impact the national economy, then we should be addressing this issue to the Director General of Import and Exports, because he has the statutory power to give exceptions from the application of these rules. Right.
Okay.
Thanks, Suresh. I think that will be very useful. Nista, let me share that with our member and see. Also, gentlemen, so I'd just like to ask from a very sort of layperson perspective and from the perspective of the general public, what is the knock-on effect of these various import restrictions? So if you were to take, for instance, from Gahanath's perspective in terms of transportation and the automobile sector, you're talking about, if you're talking, if you look at spare parts or whatever it is, you're talking about a knock-on effect that, will affect the movement of goods, movement of persons, as it goes on. Obviously, right now, as you said, you have stocks for a few more months and you can manage as things go along. But as it progresses, and if we don't see the changes that the industry would be lobbying for and needs, how does this in the longer term, I mean the mid to longer term, affect day-to-day lives of civilians, day-to-day lives, day-to-day running of the economy? What sort of impact will that have to the general population perspective? Gahanath, from your end, what would you like to say there?
As I was telling earlier, now thing is, a lot of our Sri Lankans use public transport in the case of coming to work and to move around. So that will be, if the import restrictions keep on for vehicles will be slowly, these are aging vehicles, has to be replaced after some time, but these things depreciate when you run. Vehicles is an issue. Spare parts is another problem. Like now, say, of course, now they were allowed from the 30th June operating instructions, but they're asking for 180 days credit from the supplier. This was the other thing. Now, earlier Nisa was asking Suresh about this thing. We, as a authority or government, we have been changing this goalpost several times, and we find it very difficult to go and explain to our principals also, because first we go and ask, okay, we need 90 days credit, so they approve it, and then they again 2 weeks later we can ask for 108 days credit. Sri Lankan imports are very small when you compare to big suppliers like Mercedes, Jeeps, or for that matter even Tata. So these policies, if they keep on changing, we have a problem even in, they will not recognize. Then you were talking about LCs open for air conditioners. There are confirmed LCs open for a lot of vehicles. Later the international community will not recognize, not only for demos, everybody. If the LC is open, they have to honor the LC. Otherwise, Sri Lankan LCs will be, nobody will recognize, because then our ratings will go down on international trade if this happens. So these are a few areas, but again, when it comes to tires and spare parts, same story. If there is a major item, something like a tire, we do produce tires, but very small quantity. If we keep on doing that, of course, there was high import duties on imported tires compared to locally manufactured tires. So, like Suresh was explaining, there'll be a lot of import income for the government if you do that, but there should be, you cannot produce a different, it's not easy even for local manufacturers to gear themselves to produce the whole range of tires. Because as I told you, tire is a very sophisticated, complicated item. A lot of people don't realize it, especially the highways are coming up, going at 100 kilometers per hour with the improper tire, it's a very, very risky situation, So if you don't change these things, there'll be so many impacts to the economy, I would say.
Suresh?
So very much a knock-on kind of effect, would you say?
Correct.
To the tires, just, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, on credit basis, from end of June, you can import the parts and accessories of motor vehicles. So, wouldn't the term parts and accessories of motor vehicles to be imported on credit basis cover tires? No, I don't know.
No, it's a different HS code, Suresh, because tires are not in those HS codes.
Okay.
Suresh,
as I told you, I have 4 Tata ambulances off the road without tires,
didn't you make this appeal to the controller of imports and exports to consider in the national interest or economic interest of the economy?
We have done several times. As I told you, of course, even spare parts were not allowed earlier, Nisa, then they relaxed. But I think again, we are changing the goalpost every week, There should be some decision, when they decide on something, otherwise, as Sri Lankans, we will, when it goes for international trade, we look, does not look very professional.
Yeah.
Of course, these are the political things. Now we have, I would say, good, strong leadership and things like that in the government, which we like it, because there's a lot of disciplines and things like that. But I think this goalpost changing has to stop, otherwise it's very difficult to do international businesses.
Right. Suresh, I'll answer this question first before you make an observation. What's the KPMG's is this happening in the countries that are impacted by the COVID? Because, the credibility of Sri Lanka, trading with Sri Lanka is at stake. One is the restrictions on imports, then the other one in payment methods. So is it sort of going to be an impact in terms of credibility and the profile of the country? And is this sort of common to developing countries, poorer countries, or countries in this part of the world? What's KPMG is learning or examples?
Yeah, I think basically let's keep our fingers crossed, because the last document says basically it's indefinite, and when you say indefinite, it could be a very short period also. So let's hope that basically it will get resolved fast. But if I want to just make one observation with regard to this process involved in introducing policies of this. Now, I do understand the observation that you made earlier. Okay, COVID came unexpected, so we did not have time to consult the business community to design a policy and implement once and for all. But then, having said that, Nista, you can see this process is normal to Sri Lanka. It's a norm basically. We always basically implement laws, and thereafter we change the laws when the business, when the feedback is coming from business. So even in this particular instance, I would say right now what the government should be doing is establishing a committee, so all the affected businesses can forward their grievances, their complaints, their suggestions to the committee, so that the committee can actually refine the policy that is there now once and for all, and then go forward. Now here what happens is we find, okay, lonely voices coming, basically making observations and valid observations, but at the same time the mechanism is not there to take that feedback and then introduce the correct policy, or the amendment to introduce the amendments to the policy. So I would say right now the need of the hour is to establish a committee, and that committee to obtain the feedback from all the affected parties, and then come up with one cohesive policy to refine the existing policy to go forward. Because COVID will be there. You know, it's not something that will go away within the next 2-3 months. So to address this issue, also the Sri Lanka's problems with regard to the managing the economy, these things are going to be there in the foreseeable future. So in that context, I think establishment of this committee that I'm suggesting is very, very vital. Okay. So that basically the normal businesses can go on.
Okay, adjusting the payment methods or the terms of payment, is it sort of considered a non-tariff barrier, because we are negotiating trade, we are negotiating various trade deals with various countries. WTO, have you sort of raised the flag in terms of WTO? We look at some of the changes, so drastic changes. How will it impact in terms of going forward in trying to be a good trade partner to many countries?
This is not exactly basically issue of let's say something like a FTA or something like that. So this is not something that is coming to that domain. These are basically individual transactions between private residents in both countries. I don't think basically that issue will come up here.
Yeah, you feel that some of the products that are banned for the time being, it comes under Indo-Lanka FTA, for example. I'm sure there are some products which
of course.
Which we promise favorable access to Sri Lanka from in. I mean, that is one. I'm talking about bilateral, but I'm talking as a general. If we get classified by the WTO as being more unreliable when it comes to trade policy, because
this is unprecedented time. No, basically, I think everybody understands what's going on in the world.
Sanjay, I'd just like to move on because I've kept you out from the discussion. Sanjay?
Yes.
Yeah, just because you mentioned about buyback guarantees, but I'm just asking whether going forward, whether government is going to give you, I'm talking about tenders where there is more preference to local suppliers. Is that coming in? Is it coming in place right now? Because you say more people are getting into this industry as going forward. Do you think that is that in place right now?
Yes, that is in place because there's a 2006 government procurement guidelines. It has not changed from that time, and it has been further endorsed by the Gazette published in October 2019 that local manufacturers get preference in government purchases. So government gives a 5-year buyback guarantee. I mean, after that, all companies who should come has to start looking for exports, not depending on the sort of the government guarantee forever. That should be the way forward.
Okay. You said that we are doing about 15% right now from about 7% previously. In the next 5 years, I mean, there is more consistency on the pharma industry, I think, going forward. And it may be a very sort of future secure sector in going forward in terms of new companies. In the next 5 years, where do you see the local procurement will be? What percent?
So I think I can see it doubling again, going up to 30%, or even more, because there's right now there's a lot of potential.
Okay, Gahanath, this is a question. Companies like you all are also in the medical, more on the supplies. Would you, with such favorable policy regime coming up, would DIMO look at diversifying into pharmaceutical manufacturing? And also, we saw globally lots of companies converting their operations to produce PPE. We haven't seen much because we haven't seen that kind of reorientation, given there is idling capacity everywhere. Answer this question whether you look at diversifying into pharmaceutical manufacturing.
Yeah, my good friend Sanjay will be very angry with me if I try to diversify into this industry. Not actually. We are looking at other areas, Nisa, in medical, because we have been medical supplies all these years. We are going to get into like medical equipment. Now we are looking at medical supplies, still not for drugs, but all related things. Now, for example, if you go in for a scan, those dyes which you inject for the places, and we just are negotiating with another company who supplies various items which are required for the like operations and things like that. But for drugs, we have still not thought of, because there are giants like Sanjay in Sri Lanka, which I had to fight with him. So he's my good friend.
Okay. So on this manufacturing that you're looking at doing the dyes, are you looking at partnership and manufacture it locally?
No, not really. This will be partnerships, because we'll be more into, because that is a huge, not only, but that is one small item, but also various other items for medical supplies, not the medicines, but much more related to the supplies for our equipment. This type of thing we are looking at, but of course together with partnerships, won't be able to do it on our own.
Okay, fine. Both Sanjay and Gahanath can respond to this in terms of PPE. There is supposed to be a future growth in that. Why were Sri Lankan companies kind of slow for manufacturing, getting into that bandwagon of switching to PPE? At least I know the apparel industry switched to that very fast. On the components or equipment side, is there potential going forward?
I think when it comes to PPEs, including gowns and these nitride gloves, rubber gloves, there's a huge demand at the moment. But I think certain technical capabilities are needed for that. But then again, don't know whether it will be how long term this business would be if one to invest when it comes to PPE. It could be a year or maybe 2, or maybe people will get used to the virus. So you get used to living with it. So we don't know how long it is. So in my perspective, I would not invest in something like that due to that reason. Yes, short term it's a very good business, but pharmaceuticals, it will be a good long term business in times to come. So my friend Gaha, I think you're more than welcome to.
Yes, also I agree with Sanjay. Thing is, big giants like Haley's subsidiary D Products, they're into gloves and things like that, and the HACAB is doing a mask and things like that. So they're already in this production for such a long time. There's huge investment on that kind of production. I completely agree with Sanjay, because it's that's not an industry that I don't think we should go into at the moment. There'll be oversupply of people from not only from Sri Lanka, from all over the world.
Okay. We have kind of moved on to our allotted 1 hour of discussion. I just want to, I would request all webinar participants to sort of type in their questions before we wrap it up. I'd like to ask, it seems that there is consensus that restrictions, given the post-COVID challenges, restrictions are necessary, maybe, I don't know. Do you feel where government could have done it differently? Suresh and Ganath, maybe apart from what you have said, easy is about restricting or going ahead with some higher duty options, but could the government handle this situation in a different way without disrupting a lot of sectors? Suresh, and I want Kumar also to come into this conversation. Suresh?
Yeah, I think now let's see the consequences of these restrictions that have been imposed. Now, what happens is the businesses find it difficult to do the planning with regard to their businesses because the certainty, because the open-ended restrictions that have been introduced without basically giving a time period. So, for instance, I have one client, basically the product that the client is marketing in Sri Lanka, import and trading in Sri Lanka, they are not allowed to import and sell. Now, what happens is that's the core product. So, their revenue streams get curtailed or basically almost eliminated. And in that context, still they have to continue to pay the salaries to their employees. And without knowing what the future is, basically, would the employees continue to serve that company? Would they have to close down the company? You know, so basically, it's difficult for them to plan their businesses. So I would think the government, when introducing this kind of restrictions, yes, they have no option, but they must have some kind of grievance addressing a mechanism also for this kind of businesses. Okay. You know, sometimes the big business may survive, but not the SME category.
Yeah, there's a large number of trade community which dependent on imports, and their livelihoods or the jobs are at stake.
And also, I think the government, what the government could have done differently, rather than imposing the restriction overnight, they should have given a time period for the businesses to adjust. So basically, say that after within another 30 days, the import restrictions will be coming. So then they could have adjusted their affairs to suit that condition. Now here, overnight you impose the restriction, and so many, in addition to the issues like the orders, basically where the stuff that have been imported are stuck at the customs, and then orders that have been shipped, they are all that kind of logistic issues are being faced because of the overnight imposition. Instead of the overnight imposition, I think it could have been planned, you know, given a time period for them to adjust.
Okay, fine.
Government could have done differently, I would say.
I totally agree with what Suresh is saying. For example, now, say we, as our company is 81 years old. Now, when you really compare, if you consider the way we import vehicles, or if you go to vehicle business, we have a training school, right, running for the last, I would say, 30 years, where we produce like almost 30 students every year, and they work and they go abroad and learn. So we are not just an import and sell vehicles out, keeping a security guard or something like that. There's a lot of value addition what we do. If you really see other non-genuine or grey importers, what we call. So they should have seen the industry, like what they do in other countries. Even, SAARC countries like in India, or for that matter, Nepal, you can't import used vehicles there. So these things they should have considered when they're looking at banning, because now while banning, what will happen when there's a demand? Forget the vehicles, even any item. People will look at if there's a demand, they'll look at some unethical or illegal ways of getting these things down. I mean, genuine companies or where you respect. I mean, we are a public listed company, a lot of ethics and things like that. We will be left around, and then there'll be, directions to other modes of imports. So that will slowly creep into markets. Governments they will do. As I told you, with the new leadership, there can be control, but I don't think you can control the whole thing. Same thing will happen to the financial market. When there is supplier credit, we have to go to the banks and do it properly. Other people will find ways of, remitting monies out. So these things will start up, which will be a problem.
So just one point, if I may add.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you considering Rai's initial question as well, see, we were planning so many outlets to be open, and to be frank, we haven't curtailed those plans or decided not to open those outlets. So we are going with that expansion, but I think it's easier said than done. But if you look at those outlets that they are about to open, we are now kind of challenged with some imports in terms of complete that project. And when I say new outlets, it's not about simply serving customers, but also we need to think of the other aspect of job creation. So every time we open a store, we at least have 100 staff there. But if we delay these projects, that will only have a negative impact on these potential jobs.
Good. Okay. Before I give it over to Rai in terms of wrapping up, I think it's understood that this remains a challenging situation. I think it's up to the government to prove that it took the right decisions in the next. What decisions taken in March would prove that whether it's beneficial or not. Yes, we have achieved a trade surplus in June, but I think there are a lot of ramifications of having knock-on effects on including exports to some extent, other industries we have job, and also as Ganathan mentioned about recovery. We are looking at a rebound of the economy, and imports do play a part in accelerating the recovery post-COVID. So it's very challenging, but I think as the panel did mention, we could have done it differently, or we could have been much more smart in our policies in responding during the challenging times. So I'd like to thank on behalf of the Daily FT and AmCham for all the panelists for being very frank in terms of views and ideas. And hopefully they also showed that how agile they have become in terms of managing as organizations, given this uncertain policy regime, also in terms of impact in their own businesses. So Rai, over to you.
Thanks, Nistha, and gentlemen, once again, thank you for all the insights shared. I would like to ask one question, which I'm posing to the entire panel, and I'd like you to take it on one by one. We've established the fact that this is a challenging situation. It's understood both in terms of the general public, it's understood from an industry perspective. We've also established and understood the fact that this is not something that's going away. COVID is very much a part of our lives. This whole pandemic resultant business environment is something that's here to stay. Across the globe, many countries are going back into lockdown. It seems that numbers for us also have been spiking over the last weekend. It looks imminent that there may be a further, even a degree-wise lockdown over the next week or 2 weeks. We don't know what's going to happen. What we do know is that we need to continue to navigate through this in a way that we don't come to a complete standstill again, and the economy continues to sort of recover and rebound sustainably. And to do this, as much as we've identified the challenges, I would like to ask each of you from your personal industry perspective, as well as you as a business leader, how would you see the challenges? How would you see COVID, and what has it taught you? What is the opportunity that you see from it? There's always a silver lining. What is your silver lining is the question that I'd like to ask you. So let me start from a policy perspective. Let me put it to Suresh. How do you see, what is the silver lining you see in this situation as we look at a sustained recovery trajectory? Suresh, you're on mute at the moment.
Yeah, I think the first thing I think is to learn to live without the luxuries. That's something that we'll all have to learn. Without chocolates. Chocolates are prohibited. And
oh my goodness gracious! Can you imagine a world without chocolate? I can't. So that's going to be a tough one.
And the other thing I think is basically, again, I emphasize that we have to live with what is going on now, and there are a lot of pain points. But at the same time, to cushion off these pains basically of the people, I think we need to have a middle tier that can listen, that can basically gather the issues that are there and then pass on to the government policymakers to implement. So we need to have that middle tier. Now, what actually, even in this webinar, what is happening is, because you all basically took the initiative to have this, basically only these things are coming up basically, yeah. So we need to have that official middle tier established that can gather the grievances of the businesses and the people who are affected, and that could be passed on to the relevant policymaker to give a relief or to take action. I think that's the point that I want to emphasize here.
And thank you for bringing that up. In fact, listening to everything that was being discussed, I was thinking I must look at sort of creating, maybe looking at something like a focus group where we can bring together the industry or bring together our members and sort of put together maybe a paper on these various issues that we can look at taking to the policymakers like you suggested. And of course, Suresh, will need your help on formulating something like that if we do go ahead with it. So I'll be picking your brains on that. Thank you. Gahanath, from your perspective, what would you say is the silver lining?
Yeah, right. You're talking about chocolates, and Suresh also about chocolate. Just imagine a world without vehicles, spare parts and tires. You all won't be able to go home. But Sri Lanka
I'm thinking chocolate trumps that nonetheless. I do apologize. Female perspective, you have come on. Boys and their cars, girls and their chocolates.
But Sri Lankans are very resilient people or nation, I would say. We have been having a lot of issues before. We have been changing. I think all of us should think our way of doing business we have to change. If you're not agile and do that, then we have to evolve with the situation. So I think we should be able to come out of it. I totally agree with the government policies, like we should not say if there's anything to be import substitute, especially like agriculture or even export. Also, we are just exporting things. We should do value addition. Other than very few tea companies who does value addition, we are trying to export the bulk. So these are the things which I think government should get into. I think with the current strong leadership, they will do it. We are very, very positive about it. All companies will change and will evolve accordingly, I think. Thank you on my side.
Thank you, Gahanath. Resilience of the Sri Lankan people. Kumar, over to you.
Yeah, just on the chocolates, we'll make sure there is some good quality chocolates locally manufactured. But on a serious note,
there are actually.
Yes, there are. On a serious note, I think the silver lining that we see is that lots of opportunities are generated through this. And I think many local companies have realized that, and I think they're doing what they never did before, which is good. Because I think medium to long term, that will be beneficial overall for the local community. And I think the other key message for me is how we need to coexist. It's about how we support each other. It's not about, so if you take the retailer-supplier relationship, for example, it's not about requesting extraordinary credit terms and making sure that the supplier cannot survive. It's about how the supplier supplies continuously and how we retail and meet customer demands together.
Yeah, right. I think to be fair by the local manufacturer, I think there's so much talk about chocolates. I think we have several brands which are world class in Sri Lanka. So I think we switch to local.
We do, absolutely, and Kumar is part of an umbrella organization that's one of those brands. So
yes,
definitely, much. No, I agree completely. Yes, yeah. Sanjay, as I post. Yes, very true. Sanjay, as I pose the question to you, I'm going to notch it up a bit. You're currently not restricted by the import policy, as it were. So the conversation with you is somewhat slightly different. But in terms of the opportunities you see as coming out of silver lining of COVID, one thing that I'd like to connect to is, as you know, this whole series of online discussions is themed under Bounce Back Sri Lanka. And one of the key opportunities that as a chamber we have identified is the de-risking of the global supply chain out of one or two countries and more into a diversified and maybe into the region. How we can attract these investments as companies, large global conglomerates look to diversify their manufacture and supply chain. What sort of opportunities do you see for the pharmaceutical industry specifically? As you were talking about, you see that there's growth over the next 5 years, there's projection, there is policy support. How do you see the possibility of harnessing these opportunities further? What do you think needs to maybe change a little more to grab onto this silver lining in the pharmaceutical industry?
See, right now for pharmaceutical industry, 85%, as I said, is imported. We cannot stop imports overnight for pharmaceutical. That's not possible because Sri Lanka is not self-sufficient because we highly dependent on pharma imports. So that's not possible. But in with what happened in last few months, there has been a lot of focus on pharmaceuticals. And and we can see the pharma industry in Sri Lanka is growing. Year on year, it's growing. I mean, even if you take last 10 years, because non-communicable diseases, infections, everything is rapidly growing in Sri Lanka. So, world over for that matter. So, hence the reason, could be due to this heavy chocolate consumption also, non-communicable diseases. So due to all that, there is a lot of, even the government has identified this as a trust industry. So the way forward is there's a lot of opportunity created through all this, and government is looking into substituting, stopping of some of the imports into the country. I think this will be the way forward. This will be one silver lining and one good opportunity we will have in time to come.
Excellent. Thank you. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, all our viewers and participants today. I think an interesting conversation, one that brought along many insights and an understanding of the policy from a more lay perspective as well, but at the same time identified the opportunities and brought us to an end of the evening, an end of the conversation on a positive note. Everything is not dark and doom and gloom. Things are looking up. We have to look up and look through. We have to find the light because that is the only way that we can survive the challenges that not just COVID and the pandemic, but anything that the universe throws at us. As Gahanad said, Sri Lankans are a very, very resilient people. We've been through the gamut of what the universe can throw at us over, I think, the last decade or maybe more if you take into consideration even the war and all the resultant economic and civil issues that we were faced with. So if you take the last 50 years, our contemporary history has been strewn with crisis and chaos, and yet Sri Lankans have continued to be resilient, so much so that just last year we were declared an emerging economy. Of course, COVID and all these other various issues have kind of change that right now, but there's nothing to say that give us 1 year from now again we'll be back where we want to be and rising and changing as things go along. Thank you to every single one of you panelists. Nista, for your moderation as always, bringing the conversation together, bringing the insights and the necessary intel to our AmCham members as well as all those participants out there joining us. I'd be amiss if I forget to say thank you to our partner Fairfirst Insurance and of course the Daily FT. Gentle reminder as always, this online discussion as well as the previous sessions are all up or will go up. This will go up and the others are all up on our YouTube channel. Please do subscribe, watch, like. Your watching our videos, subscribing to our channel and sharing it will help us to continue to bring these sort of resources to you on an FOC basis because we generate revenue from that YouTube channel. So a reminder to go and take a peek at the YouTube channel. Listen to the previous sessions as well because it'll bring you insights and bring connectivity to the conversations that we're continuing. Next week, we're looking at laws and legalities, how it works in terms of contracts. How do you fulfill your obligations in a situation where it's not business as normal? You don't have the resources, you don't have the raw material, you don't have the capacity to maybe fulfill your obligations, but how do you go about it? Because it's still a legal contract and you're bound by it. How do you go about it? How do you circumvent it? All these questions. We have an interesting panel lined up for that conversation as well. As always, the information will come out to you through the AmCham SL bulletin board and very kindly through, of course, Nista and the Daily FT. So until we meet again next week, from the AmCham team and of course on behalf of all of our panelists, it's stay safe, have a wonderful evening and a brilliant weekend ahead. Thank you and bye-bye from